G'day. I'm out in my shed at the moment going through an old toolbox and looking at some of these tools that I worked with many years ago, 45 years ago. We started building our own home in the Clare Valley, Seven Hill. We bought some land there, and on the land was a great big pile of building materials that someone had salvaged and left there. And so we designed a house and built a beautiful two-storey stone house there over a period of 5 years. And I think we put the last rock on the top of the wall in 1981 or 82. But then certain things happened and I had a wonderful experience where I met the Lord, and it changed my life. I was working for the government at the time, and I was working as a welfare officer with the government. And I came across a family that was in dire straits. It was totally dysfunctional. Kids were running amok. Mum and Dad had serious marital problems. And I put it to them that I didn't have an answer for them. But I said, would they like me to pray for them? And they said, yes, you can pray for us. So I did. I asked the Lord to help them with their many, many problems they had. Very dysfunctional family. And within a week or so, their problems started to turn around. And kids started to behave themselves, and marriage improved. And I was delighted. I thought, wow, God helped this family. So I shared that news back at the office with the staff in the office, that I'd prayed for this particular family and God had intervened and helped them. Well, the story went back to head office, and head office was not impressed. So they called me down to head office in Adelaide, and they wanted to talk to me about this praying for government clients. This was unheard of. So I went down to Adelaide and went up. There were 6 stories to the Director General's office. I thought, no, I won't catch the elevator. I'll go up the stairs, and every step I went up, I prayed to the Lord He'd give me the right words to say. And He did that, and we get up to the Director General's office, and she says to me, she says, is it true that you've been praying with our clients? I said, yes, it is. But not only that, the prayers were answered. Wow. She said, I'm sorry, we're not going to tolerate this in government service, so you are going to be suspended. We're not going to have you on our staff doing that sort of thing. You will be suspended. She didn't say for how long. She didn't say much at all. She just said you're going to be suspended on full pay. Fancy that, a government worker gets sent home from work because he was praying for a client and the Lord answered his prayer, and then he's not able to get involved with helping other people. Well, a friend of mine was in the Adelaide Central Mission, and he came to visit me. And he said, would you be interested in coming to work for us? He said, we could use your skills with us. And so that's what happened. I went to work for the Adelaide Central Mission and ended up managing the day centre for homeless people in Wright Court for 10 years. What an amazing experience that was. You're thrust into the depths of despair, really, with all the homeless people coming to the centre every day for a cup of coffee, to do their laundry, I was staggered. It was the last place on earth that I would have chosen to go and work, because it was a cesspool of violence and anger and confusion and madness. All the homeless were congregated together, and some were alcoholics, some were drug addicted, some were mentally ill, some were violent, some were criminals, some had just got out of jail, some are just about to go into jail. And they gathered there and conglomerate there, and it was, whoa, a wild place. In fact, the very first day that I started work in that centre, a young man came up to me with a knife in his hand and he stuck it straight into my shirt here, and he said, "Do you want to see your guts?" I didn't know what to say. So I sent up a quick word to the Lord and said, "What do I say?" He says, "Put that knife away. I don't talk to people with knives." "Oh, sorry, sir," he said. Put it in his pocket. I had no idea what to say. I tell you, I was running minute by minute, depending on a link to the heavenlies to get me out of trouble. Anyhow, the background of this story is that I was in the Clare Valley building a home for our family and living up there, but at the same time I'm learning something. I'm learning what to do with these things. I knew how to convert a pile of rubble into something beautiful, a nice rock wall. And I'd spent 5 years in training. Well, after a few years down in the day centre working with the homeless, we took a holiday, and I went with my boss, Eric. And we took a holiday to the Flinders Ranges, where my daughter had a job working on that movie, The Light Horseman. So we went up and stayed on a station where she had stayed, and she'd introduced us to the station owners, and we'd camped on Wanaka Station, just a little bit north of Hawker. And while we were there, the station owner and his sons showed us around. He had a daughter as well. And he took us to a place on the station where there was this old ruin. Unbelievable. Apparently a flood had come through there in 1958, big flood had come through, and this pioneer's hut was washed through with floodwater and tumbled down. It was half tumbled down. And there we were, standing in this ruin, and wow, the thought came to me, maybe I could use some of the homeless people that I've been working with, and we could come up here and put this back together as a bushwalker's hut on the Hyson Trail. Because very near that hut was a red marker, the Hyson Trail marker. So it all gelled together. Well, some of those people at the day centre were quite capable of being trained, quite strong and young and healthy. But they'd fallen through the cracks. They were unemployed. Didn't have a job. Maybe they'd picked up a bit of grog and maybe even drugs and got into some dependency problems. I know the story of one gentleman there. His name was George. He was a qualified engineer. He was a welder, a very competent welder in his day. He was past it now, but he had a problem with drinking. And George couldn't control his drinking. He just had a terrible alcohol problem. He was an alcoholic, and he ended up homeless on the streets, wandering the streets, getting drunk, getting picked up. Back in those days, he'd get picked up by the police and thrown into the Adelaide jail for the night. He did a few of those. On one occasion, he fell asleep in the Moore's Emporium, big store in Adelaide. He fell asleep in the toilet, and the cleaner woke him up at 6 in the morning and screamed and called the police. But eventually he came to us at the Adelaide Central Mission, and the mission said, "We've got a place for you, and it's up at Kaipo." We had an alcohol rehabilitation centre at Kaipo, where they could go and sober up and get some counsel, get some support. And he worked in the workshop up at Kaipo. Did a great job, did all the welding they needed done. He was very competent. But it came time for him to leave that program. So they found him a flat in Mansfield Park in the suburbs and said, George, we're going to shift you down to the city and you're going to live in a little flat all of your own. He said, but what am I going to do? What am I going to do? He loved working and helping, needed a purpose. So I met him and I said, look, I'm at the day centre now, George, why don't you come and help me? Come and wash some dishes. He said, yeah, I'll do that. So he used to get on the bus and come into the centre every day. He'd rock up by 9 o'clock, start washing dishes. We didn't have a dishwasher. George was it. And for 5 days a week he came in and washed dishes. And when you got 180 people coming to that centre every day for a cup of coffee, and some of them have more than one, you've got a lot of cups to wash. He had done that for 5 years. And the superintendent of the mission, Ivor Bailey, said, we should honour this man. We should give him something. What does he need? I said, well, he'd love to have a coloured television set. Back in those days, he still had a little tiny black and white TV. So the mission said, we're going to honour you and give you a coloured TV set, which he loved. But I said to him, George, would you mind if we told your story to the local paper, the Advertiser? Because you've done a marvellous job. You've turned your life around and you're giving community service, and now you've been rewarded with a colour TV. Would you mind if we told your story? Oh, he said, that's okay. So I rang the Advertiser and I said, we've got a good story down here if you want to send a reporter down. We've got a man who's washed over 1 million cups for the homeless. 1 million. I did a calculation. 180 times 2 times, so many days over 5 years. Over 1 million cups had been through the sink. So they sent a photographer down and they said, now we want George to sit on the floor and we want all the cups you've got put around him. We didn't have 1 million, but we had a couple of hundred. And he got on a ladder, the photographer, and photographed George in the middle of this circle of cups. It was one of those creative photo shots. Well, it appeared page 3 on the Advertiser the next day, Saturday morning, and I was on duty that day in the office, and a phone rings. And there's a lady on the phone. She said, I'm looking at the paper. And she said, that man's name was George. She said, it's not George so-and-so, is it? I said, it is. She said, that's my dad. She said, I want to see him. 30 odd years had passed since she was a teenager and Dad had gone, disappeared from her life. And suddenly he reappears, he's sober and he's doing community work, and she wants to see her dad. So I gave her his address and she got on her bicycle and she said, that's the suburb next to me. She rode her bike across to that suburb and she said, that's wonderful. She said, now that I've found your dad, I'm never going to let you go. Well, George came into the office a week or so later and said, he said, my life's changed. He said, now I've got to have Coke in the fridge for the grandchildren because they come round to see me. He didn't even know he had grandchildren. But his life was turned around because he had a purpose, because he stayed sober, and because someone cared about him. And so there were people in the centre like that. Would come every day. Young men looking for work, young men lost and confused, young men had broken hearted because their girlfriends kicked them out or their parents kicked them out. So when I find this ruin needing to be restored for a hut on the Hyson Trail, it all gelled. It all came together. And so my boss Eric, he went off and did the fast talking with the government. And yes, they reckoned they'd do that. So they gave us back then, in 1988, I think it was, $7,000 to take homeless people into the bush. We camped in tents and we took our tools and we mixed the sand we got out of the creek with some cement and we put the rocks back together so they wouldn't fall over again. That was the problem in the first place, they didn't have cement. But we had cement and sand and we remade that little hut on the Hyson Trail. I think it took us 3.5 weeks. It was just amazing. Just amazing how those lives were transformed. You know, we'd sit around the campfire at night, we'd tell stories, we'd share our journeys, play some music. I remember I'd bring out the old harmonica, play a few songs, someone else would sing. Got one in my pocket now, as a matter of fact. And this is one of the songs that I played and I told them all about it. He touched me. Jesus touched me. That's what happened. And he made me whole. And so I was able to share my journey. I said, the reason I went to the country to build a stone house in the bush and have a bit of property around me was that I was a drug addict. I was addicted to marijuana. And it took a hold of me and kept me a prisoner for 7 years. All the time that I was building a house on that and taking a toke here and there and smoking marijuana. But it's a terrible drug. And it removes your moral compass. And it just demands more and more of your time and energy, and eventually it will eventually kill you. And I had suicidal thoughts. I was going to hang myself. But then I met a man. I went seeking. First of all, I cried out to God. I inadvertently activated a promise of God. God's got a phone number. It's called Psalm 50 verse 15, 5015 is God's phone number. And inadvertently, I activated it. I went out one night on the hill where we'd had a Christian youth club meeting and I had a crucifix in the ground. They had their meditations around that. I went out by that cross and I had a vision. The land opened up between me and the cross, like a big crevasse, a black hole. And I knew that that was going to be the end of me, because that was the way to death. And it frightened the living daylights out of me. So I looked up to the stars. It was a beautiful night, I remember. And I just cried out to God. I said, God, if you're there, help me. And I'm telling this story to the boys around the campfire. You know, the next day, I met a man at a petrol station. And he says to me, I was the guest speaker at the Lions Club last night. I said, what? You were guest speaker? I mean, I was president of the Rostrum Club, which is a public speaking club. What on earth did you have to talk about? And he said, I told him how I got off marijuana. Really? But I couldn't tell him straight away that I had the same problem. But I kept going back there for petrol every day for a few days. Just top it up, mate, top it up. Because I wanted to know more. I wanted to know more. And he told me, he said, you call upon God in your time of trouble and he will deliver you. You'll glorify his name. And that's what I'd done. It was a promise of God. I'd called upon him in my time of trouble and he showed me the way. He led me to that man at the petrol station. And he set me free. So I said to this bloke, well, what do I do? He said, just ask God to help you. Go home, get all your drugs and get rid of them. Call on the name of Jesus and you'll be set free. So I went home and I got all my drugs. I had it hidden under the floor in the walls. Because you're building a house, you can put a little cavity in there. And I got it all and I put it in a wheat bag. I had a wheat bag full of marijuana. And I had a big boiler I put in the bottom of the house in the basement. So I opened the door to the boiler, lit up a big fire, and I stuffed that bag of marijuana in the fire. And I said, Jesus, help me. And I was free. I rose, went forth, and followed thee. That's all he wanted me to do. Just come follow me, and I'll set you free. And that's what I did. And I told the blokes about that at the camp, around the campfire. And some of those guys also gave their hearts to the Lord. Just an amazing experience. And so we went on to finish the hut. We put in some nice bunks, mezzanine floor. Beautiful experience just to see that. And then we had a big opening day. Grand opening. People were coming, a busload of people came up from Adelaide to be part of the celebration. It was a wonderful day of celebration. And I drew aside just before the opening. I thought, I'm going to go and write a poem about this. This has been such a lovely experience. So I went down the creek, took a pen and paper, went down the creek, and I wrote a poem about Mayo's Hut. There's a place up in the Flinders known to few as Mayo's Gorge. It's a secret jewel of beauty in our state, with its rugged, rusty mountains punching high into the sky and the peaceful pools of water edged with slate. 'Twas the place where William Mayo and his Mary came to live. 'Twas the place they wore their fingers to the bone, cutting logs along the river, fetching water from the creek. The place they built their humble hut of stone. It's a place we've come to cherish on the splendid Hyson Trail. It's a place with special meaning in our lives, for we came and camped and stayed a while and rebuilt in a Mayo style, feeling the spirit of pioneers as we made the old anew. And the few of us so privileged to know this time so well found not only were we renovating ruins, but our own lives, partly wasted, were restored with hope and vigour as we watched this home reborn before our eyes. There's a wonder in the Mayo's Gorge. There's a treasure in the hut, but you have to come and stay a while to find it. Don't be rushed and don't be busy. Think of others gone before. Know the pain they felt in their tired, aching bones. The heartbreak as the splendour of the country turned to scorn. Know how flies and heat and drought and dust forced hopeful hearts to mourn. But come and be and hear the sparks, the crackle of the fire, the endless outback sunshine, the prickles and barbed wire. Bring food and comfy walking shoes, leave behind the mutt and come and stay and be our guest for a night in Mayo's hut.